Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Mr. Cunningham, and recently we've been talking about SI units and metric units. Remember, SI and metric units are very similar. SI, or the International System of Units, is the systems that scientists around the world use in order to be able to collaborate and use the same data so that they can relay results quickly and easily. Now today what we're going to be talking about is converting units. So how do we make a kilometer? How do we record that in meters? How do we take a centimeter and convert that to millimeters? How do we take a milliliter and convert that to deciliters? What we're going to be doing today is learning how to convert, and really I think after you catch on you'll be like, wow, this is pretty easy. So let's take a look at it. So let's look at how we can convert metric units to other metric units. So remember yesterday you saw these prefixes, and I showed this exact same picture, and what we talked about was all the different prefixes and really what they mean. So kilo means 1,000 times larger than the base unit. Hecto means 100 times. Deca, 10. Then the base, remember, always represents 1. Then deci is 1/10 or 0.1. Centi is 1/100th or 0.01. And milli is 1,000th or 0.001. Now, what you may not have seen is these little air bubbles, or these little thought bubbles that have different information in them. But what you need to make sure you remember when you're converting metric units is that let's say we're converting from a kilogram to a hectogram. See, kilo is on the top step, the largest of these numbers. If we move down one step, okay, we would be changing that number. So what you have to remember is when you go down the stairs, so you see how that person there is supposed to be Albert Einstein, I believe. When you go down the stairs, you move the decimal on that number to the right. Now when you go up the stairs, you move the decimal to the left. So when you're moving down the stairs, your number should get bigger. When you're going up the stairs, your number should get smaller. And the reason we can do this is because the metric system is based on multiples of 10. So when we make our number bigger, it's always going to go up by factors of 10. And that's going to be important to remember, and I'll show you kind of a little example in this next slide. So here we have just a ruler. Now, on this ruler we have centimeters and millimeters, which are labeled. Now, I told you this in class, a centimeter is 10 times larger than a millimeter. So I'm going to kind of show you how this converting works. So let's say we have a line. So this red line, if you look at your centimeters, is about 2, and we're going to say 2.2 centimeters. Now if I asked you to convert that to millimeters, you could either look at the steps and do it, which is what we're going to do here in a second, but you also need to kind of think about it. A centimeter is larger than a millimeter. Remember, the centimeters is the 1, 2, 3, 4. The millimeters are those tiny little tick marks that you can see next to the edge of the ruler. So if a centimeter is larger than a millimeter, it's almost like we're changing what we're measuring by. A centimeter is bigger, okay? So when you start measuring something by a smaller unit, there's going to be more of them. So our number needs to get bigger. So if we're changing from centimeters to millimeters, we would move down the step, one step, which means we'd move our decimal point to the right one spot. So our measurement now would be 22 millimeters. Notice how if we just move the decimal point from between the twos to on the right side of the twos, we moved it one spot over, and it increases by a factor of 10. 2.2 times 10 is 22. Now I'll kind of show you a little bit more of how we can do that. So here's an example. So the question is, convert 2,000 milliliters to liters. The first thing we need to do is we need to look at the prefixes, because that's going to tell us information that we need to know. So we have milli, which is our bottom unit. But then there's no prefix in front of the liters, which means it's the base unit, or it's the B. So milli stands for the M, and the no prefix stands for the B. So now what we need to do is we need to go from milliliters to liters. So we need to go from the little m up to the B. So we move up 1, 2, 3 steps. So if we move up 3 steps, that means we need to move our decimal point to the left 3 spaces. So you move it to the left 3 spots. That puts the decimal point in between the 2 and the 0, which means we have 2 liters. Let's look at another one. So here the same thing, we're converting, but now it's 1.5 kilometers to meters. So the first thing we need to do is look at our front prefix. So we've got kilo, which is the big K, and then we've got meters. There's no base unit, or there's no prefix in front, so meters is our base unit, or our B. So we look at how many spaces we move. So now we're moving down. Remember, when you move down, you have to move your decimal point to the right. When you move up, you have to move your decimal point to the left. Well, here we're moving down, so we move our decimal point to the right, which gives us 1,500 meters. You see in the at the 15, you have our second and third movement of our decimal point. There's no zeros there. There's nothing there. So we need to add in those zeros to make the 1,500 meters. Now what if I wanted to write this number in scientific notation? That's what the purple SN stands for. What if I wanted to write this in scientific notation? Well, I would take my decimal point and move it until I get a number between 1 and 10. And so pretty much I would undo what I just did, move the decimal point back between the 1 and 5, and then I would add a times 10, and then the number of spots I moved it. So I moved it 3 spots, which gives me 1.5 times 10 to the third. If you're having trouble with scientific notation, you can look back at our intro video, which talks about scientific notation. Let's do another one. So now we're converting 21 centigrams to decigrams. So we look at our prefixes. We've got centi to deci. So we start from the C and we're going to go up to the D. So when we move up, remember, we move the decimal point to the left. If we move up, we move the decimal point to the left. So we moved up 1 spot, which means we move the decimal point 1 spot, because our unit that we are measuring with, a decigram, is bigger than a centigram. Okay? So when we are moving from centigrams to decigrams, our number should get smaller. Okay, it's kind of like feet in inches. A foot is bigger than an inch, so if we measured something in inches and then measured it in feet, okay, it should get smaller. The number of feet should be smaller. Same thing here. So we go from centigrams to decigrams, we move it 1 spot, and that gives us 2.1 decigrams. So let's look at one more, and this will be our last one. So let's convert 0.02 kilograms to milligrams. So we look at the prefixes. We have kilo and we have milli. So now we have to move a lot of spaces. So we start from the kilo, or the K, and we're going to move down to milli, which is 6 steps, which means we have to move our decimal point 6 spots, and then we need to fill in the zeros. So we have on step 3, 4, 5, and 6, there's no zeros there, so we need to add those in. So we end up adding 4 zeros to the end, which gives us 20,000 milligrams. Or if we wanted to write that in scientific notation, we would start with our decimal point at the end and move it back until we get a number between 1 and 10. So we'd move it back from the 0, we'd move it back 1, 2, 3, 4. We'd put the decimal point between the 2 and the 0, which would give us 2 times 10 to the 4th milligrams. So, if you are still kind of having some trouble on scientific notation, you can remember go back and check some previous videos. Well, that's going to finish up our video over metric units. I hope you learned a little bit about how to convert units from milliliters to kiloliters or liters to milliliters. If you have any questions, make sure to write them down so that you can ask me in class. Have a good evening, and I'll see you in class.